We're going to follow it up this morning with the parable of the unforgiving servant. So if you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn to Matthew chapter 18. And I'll say this about last week's message and really about any message on forgiveness. I know that it's difficult, and many of us find passages and messages on forgiveness difficult because of how difficult we find it to forgive. Not just to be forgiven, but to forgive people who have wronged us, who have harmed us, who have hurt us. And that's why I want to move on from last week's message where we looked at how to really understand lessons in forgiveness. To this week, I want to look at forgiveness as a framework. Because once you know how to forgive, you have to make it a part of your life. And we're going to see in Matthew chapter 18 that Jesus gives us a framework for dealing with people. I'm not going to read you all of Matthew chapter 18. We'll look at the latter portion of Matthew chapter 18. But on the front side, he really deals with human relationships and how to deal with interpersonal disputes. And so if you're here this morning and you do not get along with someone, there is someone you have harmed or has harmed you, Matthew chapter 18, as far as Christians go, is how we are to deal with that. But on the heels of Jesus' teaching about how to deal with your brothers and sisters when they wrong you, Peter rightly asks an important question. And it's a question that many of us would have asked. And the best we can tell, it's because Peter knows this is the question of their time. Our culture today likes to ask questions. We have a culture that is constantly redefining morality, and 2,000 years ago, the Hebrews were trying to define how many times you were supposed to forgive an offensive brother. Someone who wrongs you and says that they're sorry, and when they're corrected, you forgive them. How many times are you supposed to do that? And there were two major schools of thought. Some believed that 2 was appropriate, some believed that 3. And so Peter, on the heels of Jesus talking about these interpersonal disputes, Peter asks a question in Matthew chapter 18 and verse 21. I would invite you to see what Peter says. Then Peter came up and said to him, "Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him?" And you can almost picture Peter saying this. "How often will my brother, Andrew, offend me, sin against me, and I forgive him? As many as 7 times?" And in Peter's mind, he's being generous because the cultural debate is between 2 and 3. Jesus said to him, "I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times." And in the Greek language there, it's not the idea of 77 like we think 7, 7. It's 70 multiplied by 7. 70 times 7. You can almost picture Peter and Andrew standing there and doing the math in their head. And while 490, because that's what we do, we're in the West, Jesus is using an astronomical number to say you've missed it. And we say, okay, so 490, that's not the point. As we'll actually see, the point is in the text, and I'm going to point it out to you in a minute. But when you and I begin saying, well, 70 times 7, that's 490, if you've ever been around siblings, you know 490 forgivenesses go fast. Every parent laughing right now has multiple children. And that's why Peter said, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? This is not difficult to understand. I'm actually disappointed that it took me 40 years to even see it. There is only one other place in the Bible where you find this phrase 77 times. I'm not going to read it for you, but it's in Genesis chapter 4, verse 24. And often the greatest commentary on God's word is God's word. And Jesus knew they knew the Old Testament. And in Genesis 4, verse 24, the 7th generation from Cain is singing a song of revenge. His name is Lamech. Lamech is the epitome of violence begetting violence, begetting violence, begetting violence to the 7th degree. And he tells his wives, he is the first in the Old Testament, he's the first recorded man with multiple wives. This is how quickly sin moves. Adam and Eve sin, one of their sons commits murder, and his 7th grandson, Lamech, says to his wives, "Today I was out, and a man injured me, a young man, a little child, and I killed him." And if it was said of Cain that he would be avenged 7 times, it would be said of Lamech, he will be avenged 77 times. Do you see the clear picture that Jesus is drawing? 77 is the ultimate vengeance, and this is the ultimate distillation of sin. Lamech boasts of escalating injury to the point of murder to his wives. He's the first polygamist in Scripture. And Jesus is laying out, you can let revenge take you to the most awful place where you are 70 times 7 avenging, or you can do that with forgiveness. And you can create a new framework. And Jesus is pointing out, you live in a world that is full of revenge, that is full of vengeance. And so understand this about forgiveness. Forgiveness will always seem outrageous when we are shaped by revenge. It will always seem outrageous when we are shaped by revenge. Our culture is shaped by revenge. Their culture was shaped by revenge. They were constantly looking to avenge themselves, whether it be to the Romans or to some other oppressor or to their enemies. And so what Jesus is pointing out is he's saying, you want to forgive to a certain point, and then you want to let vengeance take over. And I'm telling you, the kingdom is not a place where we just forgive, and then we go back to factory settings. He says the kingdom is a place where we forgive, and we forgive, and we forgive. And it seems outrageous, but Jesus is saying the way you're living is outrageous. It's gross. If you just constantly look to get even, it will never be enough, and you will get to the 7th place, the 70 times 7, where vengeance is all you seek, and it will lead to injury and murder and malice and hatred. And so Jesus is outlining 2 pathways: absurd revenge and absurd forgiveness. And do you know what the Westerner in all of us wants? No, Jesus, isn't there a third way that's somewhere in the middle? And that's what they were debating. How about 2? How about 3? And Jesus is laying out the framework for the kingdom. It's absurd. Now, he's not saying to let people take advantage of you. You can forgive without allowing someone to continue to harm you. But he points to Lamech, the pinnacle of a violent society ruled by vengeance, and begins to ask, in which direction do you want to spiral? Do you want to spiral toward revenge to where you're killing people for injuring you? Or do you want to spiral toward forgiveness that is radical and outrageous? And I can sense in you what Jesus probably sensed in them. You're saying to yourself, that's stupid. It's no way to live. How could this society function? How would this even work? And before Peter could even ask that question, Jesus tells a story that seems silly and outrageous. He continues in verse 23. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. You and I don't use talents, and we think in billions and millions and thousands and hundreds, and so these numbers don't mean anything. That number is outrageous. First of all, 10,000 was the largest Greek number, and a talent was the largest denomination. This is an astronomical number. If you were to try to put it into today's terms, it's something like $100 trillion. If you took all of the billionaires in the earth and put all of their money together, they have 20 trillion. This guy owes 100 trillion. It's outrageous. Jesus' story is already off to a crazy start. What kind of king lets a guy run up $100 trillion debt? What is this? Verse 25, and since he could not pay, what an understatement, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. This may seem harsh to you, but this is how accounts were settled back then by kings. Verse 26, so the servant fell on his knees imploring him, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. It's not possible. This is the entire world economy you owe. And out of pity for him, verse 27. Some of you have been in some settings where I've talked about chiasms before when Jesus teaches in parables. If there are 7 parts, the middle part is the most important and often the middle word. And if you were to look for a chiasm here, you would find that verse 27 is really the central theme. And it's this word, splagoutsamai, this Greek word that we find in last week's parable. Having compassion on him, the father ran to him. This is the same word. And out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. He didn't just release him and say, all right, do the best you can. He says, you know what? You're released. The debt is forgiven. So understand this about the kingdom that Jesus is inaugurating here. Forgiveness is a way of life in this kingdom. It starts at the top. The king forgives an outrageous debt. To put it into perspective, Herod the Great was one of the wealthiest leaders of Hebrew history. He built incredible monuments and cities and temples, and he had the tax revenue of about 800 talents per year. And that was just an incredible sum of money. And this guy in this parable owes 10,000 talents. It's just not even reasonable. It's not even realistic. And yet it's forgiven. Because in this outrageous story, Jesus is saying, this king in this kingdom forgives. And if this servant has any sense, he can feel the ground moving beneath him, like everything changes now. And it's important to notice that the king doesn't even give his reasoning. We're told that he has compassion, but he just says, you know what, you're forgiven. You're free. The second thing we see here is this kingdom doesn't operate according to our values at all. What are our values? What do we value? Our values are simple. We are always keeping up with the math. What I owe financially, what I owe you emotionally, how many times I've forgiven you versus how many times you've forgiven me, how many times I said I'm sorry to you versus how many times you said you're sorry to me. And here, this king, he doesn't even offer reasoning. He just values rescuing this man. And I just have to tell you, that's not how our culture operates. We have boiled everything down to a dollar amount. If it's not worth it, often we don't care about people. That's how our society works. You're worth this much an hour. Your life is worth this much. Your vehicle is worth this much. Your time is worth this much. And here this king values rescuing one man more than the equivalent of $100 trillion. What is Jesus really trying to do? Is he trying to attach a number? No, he's using the largest figure and the largest denomination to say infinity. Jesus says, you assign the value. And this king is going to say, rescuing that man was more important. The kingdom Jesus operates in doesn't operate according to our values. And I can sense it because you're thinking the same thing I can. Okay, well, if this guy owes $100 trillion, how much does the next guy owe? And where are they coming up with this money? Are they printing money? How does this work? And what we want is to understand the heart of the king. And brothers and sisters, that's like trying to know and be God. It is out of his deep well of mercy that he continues to forgive you and me our debt of sin, the pain that we cause. How could this kingdom exist? And I know what else you're thinking probably. What kind of precedent is this? Now all the servants are going to take advantage of him. You can't run a kingdom this way. And yet the Lord in heaven continues to forgive, knowing that sometimes we do try to take advantage of the Lord, don't we? Don't you think about what other people do. We do tend to take advantage of the Lord, don't we? And his mercy. Oh, God will forgive me. He has to. One commentator said that this wasn't just like a bankruptcy or, absolving someone's debt. This is essentially the end of bookkeeping. There's no sense in keeping up with it anymore. This is just the end of keeping score at all. And that's the point that Jesus is laying out. In this kingdom, there's no keeping score. There's no, I'm ahead and you're behind, and you owe me, and I'm going to hold this over you forever because you really wronged me and you really hurt me, and I forget about what I've done. What you've done is worse. And Jesus is laying out this new framework that really makes us uncomfortable, and here's why it makes us uncomfortable. Third truth from just this first portion of the kingdom, we prefer the kingdom we understand. I have a hard time wrapping my head around this kingdom, so I prefer the kingdom that I understand. And the kingdom that I understand is when you do wrong, I get you back. When I do wrong, I owe you a little bit. And so I have a debt and you have a debt and we're always trying to pay off debt, and I know how much my debt is worth, and I've assigned this much value to what I've done right, and I've assigned this much value to what you've done wrong. And so we determine that we have a better understanding of the kingdom than the king. And as we'll see, not only do you and I prefer the kingdom we understand, so does this servant. He's just been forgiven a large debt, and it has not penetrated to his heart. It may have gotten here to his head. He gets it. I'm free. It has not changed him. And this is the goal of the gospel, brothers and sisters. Jesus doesn't want you to just know that you're forgiven here. He doesn't want you to just spout off verses and memorize things. He wants you to feel forgiven here and to have this deep sense of compassion that wells up in you. And so when you are wronged by others, you say, well, I've been forgiven. How could I withhold forgiveness? Because I've been forgiven and I feel it here. I don't just know it here. But he only knows it here, and it hasn't made it here. And this is the great dilemma for many of us as Christians. We've got it all here, but it has not made its way here. And so we won't forgive. We can't forgive because that begins to mess with our mind and say, but if I forgive them, because we haven't truly allowed the kingdom to move from our head to our hearts and to infect the way that we live and to become a framework for how we operate and how we walk through life and how we move through life. And what we think is that by holding on to accounts, I'll be better off, and holding on to this baggage will actually make my life easier. And I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, Jesus is laying out a framework and a pathway and a way to follow him that is much lighter. It is much easier. It is much better for your soul. It is much better for your heart. It is much better for your sleep. It is much better for your life. And most of us are like, I don't know, I really prefer this way, where I keep up with everybody who owes me and who needs to get right with me because what they did was so bad. Meanwhile, I forget about the things that I've done because, Lord knows my heart. And the Lord wants to free us from that prison. And so the parable continues in verse 28. But when the same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. This is like 3 months' wages. It's not nothing. It's not $5. Think about what you make over 3 months. Okay? That's a substantial amount of money. It's thousands of dollars. But it's nowhere near the debt he was just forgiven. And seizing him, he doesn't even speak to him. He just finds him. Seizing him, he began to choke him. Now, people have approached me the wrong way from time to time. Nobody has ever walked up and not said a word and started choking me. And the idea is, in this Greek language, the picture is that he puts him against the wall. Began to choke him, saying, pay what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him, have patience with me, and I will pay you. Almost word for word, not quite. If you're paying attention, there is one word left out. It is nearly word for word what this man had said to his king. But this man only says to him, I will pay you. He doesn't say, I'll pay you all of it. He says, I'll pay you. And the reason he probably says that is because even he knows this is not that much. Like, you're a high-level master. You answer to the king. What I owe you, it's a substantial amount of money, but it's nowhere near the amounts of money we deal with often. Verse 30. He refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. That's a key wording there, until he should pay the debt. Verse 31. When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed. And they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. Do you notice this kingdom? It pays attention to what's going on. And while this servant is forgiven a great debt, he's not really been changed. And those around him are bothered by what he does. I'd say it this way. In this kingdom, holding on to offenses is outrageous. I didn't say our kingdom. I didn't say our world. I said in Jesus' kingdom, it's outrageous to hold on to offenses. The other servant's like, what's wrong with this guy? Can you believe this guy? Meanwhile, we're like, no, we get it. We totally get it, because often we do hold on to offenses, don't we? We ruminate over them. We think about them. We picture what was said to us, what was done to us, how good vengeance would feel. Can't remember which song I was listening to this week. I hope it was a good one. And one of the lyrics is, an honest man knows revenge is never sweet, but we love to think about revenge. This is directly opposed to our way of thinking. Our way of thinking is, no, when there's a debt, you pay it. When someone owes us, we get it. And remember, Jesus is using money here to illustrate something deeper. I am not saying that if someone owes you money, that you are obligated as a Christian to forgive their financial debt. I'm saying if you can, that's often a kind thing to do. Jesus is speaking here more about the moral debt, the sin toward our Father, and then how we hold on to the sins against us of others. I would say it this way. You know what this man really wants? This man wants both kingdoms. He wants the forgiveness of this kingdom, but the bookkeeping of his kingdom. God, you forgive me what I am owed to you. Meanwhile, I'm going to exact everything out of everyone who owes me anything of substance. You wrong me, I'm going to get even with you. You talk bad about me, I'm going to talk bad about you. This man is illustrating for us what it looks like to come into the church, try to have the blessings of the Lord without full surrender to his way. True repentance and release of our control. Grace for me, justice for you. Judge me by my intentions, but judge everyone else by their actions. We are all, or have all been, this man. And Jesus wants us to see ourselves both as the offender and the offended. He wants us to get a good look at both, because the problem for most of us is we tend to only ever see ourselves as the victim. Pastor, you don't know what I've been through. I understand. You have been wronged. I have been wronged. This is a fact of living on planet Earth. If you have relationships with humans, if you have relationship with your family, if you are around neighbors, if you have coworkers, you are going to be offended. It is awful. It is part of living in a fallen world where we rejected God and turned to our own ways. And the seventh iteration of that was Lamech. And this is the violent, vengeant world we live in. However, you are not just a victim. Hear me. Often, we love to remind ourselves of all the times we've been a victim while forgetting all the times we have offended, that we have hurt. And I'm not here to encourage you to bring up forgiven sin this morning. Only the enemy would do that. I'm here to remind you that we have been forgiven a great debt, and we are often given an opportunity to forgive others. And we love to embrace one while mulling it over in our mind on the other. Let's see what happens. You probably know what happens in the next verse. Then his master summoned him and said to him, "You wicked servant." I believe Jesus is telling this story on purpose to show us it may have been that this man, as soon as he was forgiven the debt, knew what he was going to do. His heart hadn't been changed. This is my chance. I'm back at even. I'm going to go exact everything that is owed to me. Maybe he walked out of there thinking, this king is such a sucker. I'm going to go run up even more debt. We don't know. But this king says to him, "You wicked servant. I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should not you have mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you?" And in his anger, his master delivered him to the jailers. If you've got a King James version, it might say tormentors. Until he should pay all his debt. So also, now Jesus is saying, there's the parable. So also, my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. I'm so glad Jesus, in his infinite wisdom, knew to put those last three words there. From your heart, not your lips, not your post, your heart. I want you to see this about this king. This king gives you what you want. You want to live in a world where it's tit for tat? He comes after you, he says, "Hey, you're getting what you deserve here." The older I get, when I was young, it used to make me queasy thinking about heaven and hell. I have now read enough of the word and understood the parables enough. Jesus makes it very clear every time he even talks about hell. There are most humans are not going to find themselves in hell. Surprisingly, they have rejected God and they want nothing to do with God. And the mere idea of worshiping God, of loving God, of spending time with God, they would rather spend eternity separated from God. And so God is simply giving them over to what they want. And this man is getting what he wants. You want bookkeeping? We'll go back to bookkeeping. You owe a substantial debt. The king offers mercy to those who offer mercy and forgiveness. But if you want one-sided justice, well, justice is coming for you. A word on that, I heard a great message this week. The pastor explained that the reason most of us need to forgive before we pursue justice is because if we haven't truly forgiven someone in our heart, when we go to seek justice, we'll actually be looking more for vengeance. It's not about real, healthy justice anymore. It's about us exacting revenge. And this is why forgiveness is so important and it's so internal. I love that some of the older versions use tormentor here. It is the perfect allusion to what Jesus is saying here. He's saying when you refuse to forgive someone, you are in a prison of your own design, of your own making, and it torments you, not them. You sit there thinking about all the things they did to you, and they're not even thinking about you. You're the one being tormented. And you also have the key to the prison cell. You can forgive them their debt. You can walk out of that prison cell. But no, you stay in this prison of torment. I'm convinced that many of us are living in a prison full of torment of our own making, wishing evil upon people as we endure the evil ourselves. And so finally, from this parable, last truth I'll share with you, and then I want to give you some practical tips. Forgiveness is the key to escaping torment. It doesn't seem logical. And this is why the teachings of Jesus are so difficult. You say, no, Mark, for me to be satisfied, I need them to do this and this and this, and then I'll feel better. I would highly encourage you to talk to somebody who's ever gotten real revenge on someone and see how much better they feel. I would strongly encourage you to talk to someone who's held on to bitterness and unforgiveness for decades and see if it's worth it. We assume that we're locking them up by not forgiving them, when in reality we are confining ourselves. As I said last week, and I have to say anytime I talk about forgiveness, forgiveness doesn't mean what they did was okay. It simply means you're not going to let that thing ruin and wreck the rest of your life. It doesn't mean that there aren't consequences for what they did. It doesn't mean you can't have boundaries. It doesn't mean that you have to be best friends. This is all illogical. This isn't even the teaching here. The point that Jesus is making is you have to learn to release people from their debt so that you can move on. But the truth is, and if I could for a moment, do you want to know why most of us don't forgive? If you're real honest, because it feels real good to hold on to it, doesn't it? Momentarily. To think about revenge, to think about. And Jesus is saying, I came to offer you life and life more abundant. And while this parable is certainly about the reality of sin and the weight of sin, this is a teaching that really focuses on our life here on earth. Jesus is saying, if you'll get this right, I'm telling you, life is so much better for you if you can live in this framework. But we're trapped because we think, if I forgive them, what if they do it again? Hey, look me straight in the eye. Look at this. They're still going to be human. You're never going to change that. You forgiving them is not going to give them some green light that they haven't already observed. They are probably going to hurt people. Why? Because they're human. And you've got to get to the place where you see them the way you see you. And this is the part that is hard. This is the part that requires maturity and spiritual growth. You've got to see, I've been forgiven so much. And you know, in reality, I love for people to judge me by my motives. What were their motives? No, they're just evil. They're awful. They are what they did. And you don't think of you that way. If you get caught telling a lie, you say, well, you know, but if someone else tells a lie, they're a liar. It's the nature of the human heart. God wants to get you to a place where you see your brothers and your sisters, even the ones that have offended you, with a gracious, bent toward forgiveness spirit. I'll give you a couple of practical tips for how to grow in forgiveness now, and then I want to wrap up. How you and I can grow in forgiveness. And this really goes to all of Matthew 18. I'd encourage you this week to read Matthew chapter 18. In Matthew 18, Jesus gives us the framework for if you're sinned against, to go to them, only then to go maybe find some elders, only then maybe to involve people from the church. And so I would say it this way: only escalate conflicts when necessary. Now, that's not what most of us do, is it? We love to escalate it immediately. Did you hear what they said about me? I cannot believe they handed me a prime timer. They're never handing stuff out at our church again. I need to talk to pastor right this minute. We escalate way too quickly. You want to know how to grow in forgiveness? Learn to slow down when you're in rage. The flip side of this, keep the circle as small as possible. The point of Matthew 18, this is what a lot of Christians do. They take Matthew 18 and they're like, all right, I got to do this, then I can go tell the pastor. Then I can go get the church involved. Then I can have them church discipline. The goal is not to skip steps 1 and 2. The goal is for it to stop at step 1, stop at step 2. Why? To keep it small. Do you know why? Because in the family of God, we like to keep a tight grip on the offenses. We don't like to go out telling everybody all of our business. Not that we're trying to hide abuse, but because we're trying to lead to restoration. And we don't all want to walk around knowing, well, that one time I made a mistake. They went and told the whole church before I could even talk about what happened. No, we keep the circle as small as possible so there can be healing, so there can be restoration, so there can be trust. Third principle in growing in forgiveness, remember, you are often an offender. You may not offend as often as the person who's offended you, but you are often an offender. Pastor Mark, no way. Listen, I've met most of you. We are all capable of offending without meaning it. I tell this joke in Life Track. On the third week of every month, I go into Life Track and I talk with people about what it looks like to join our church, be a part of our church. And I always say, if I were you, this is what I do, but, you got to know your gifts. And my gift is not small talk. They don't allow me to really meet new guests in the lobby. It's not because, they don't want me to. It's because I get awkward after 2 or 3 minutes of small talk. I've never been good at it. I'm good with people I know. And I've said some things that were offensive. I just didn't know what to say, so I asked him a question. I asked him some presumptuous. I don't do small talk well. I've offended people inadvertently and have to ask for forgiveness. Oh, but you didn't mean to. It doesn't matter. Fourth principle for growing in forgiveness. And this is where Jesus wants to get you. He wants you to see them as you see yourself. I'm better than them. Hey, it's just us. The point of this parable is we've all been forgiven a tremendous debt by the Lord. And Jesus wants to get rid of this bookkeeping where it's like, well, I'm not perfect, but I'm a better person than them. Stop that. Put that away. You're a sinner saved by grace. I'm a sinner saved by grace. They're a sinner saved by grace. And if you can't see that, bitterness has robbed you of the reality of the situation. Is what they did okay? No. And this is what our pastor, we meet with people and we mourn with them. We cry with them. We reject what was done to them, but it's been done. And there's no one doing it. And giving into bitterness and hate in our hearts is not the answer. What Jesus really wants to lay out for us is this. With whichever framework we choose, we are going to begin creating a world that is either spiraling toward vengeance or radical vengeance, outrageous vengeance, or spiraling toward outrageous forgiveness. You say, Pastor Mark, I don't have control over the world. No, but you have control over your home. And your children are watching you. And if you are constantly given to revenge, they are going to be just like you, always looking to get even. And you're old enough to know that is not the way to live, and you don't want to lead them down that path. Or lead them to outrageous forgiveness with clear boundaries and understanding not to let people take advantage of you. I got to be careful how I say this next part, and maybe we'll cut this from the internet later. because this is when we stream online. I've done a lot of work over the last few years as it relates to forgiving my biological father. And it's not just because I needed to. It's because I began to realize that this is how I began to portray myself. I'm the son of a single mother. My father walked out before I was a year old. And that's fine when you're in your 30s, but when you have boys, I started to realize I don't want my boys to understand that because my father made a huge mistake, that for the rest of my life, I live out my identity based on what he did to me. And I don't want to teach them that if their father ever makes a mistake, that they're going to hold on to that the rest of their life. So what I had to do was I had to come to the point where I could do some real work and understand that my biological father made a huge mistake. But since then, he's done right. He got married, had 2 boys. He coached all of their teams. When I met him as a teenager, I was bitter because he had created a good life for that family. What I should have been was grateful that he had made a good life for that family. I didn't get to enjoy it, but I can't let the bitterness there infect me to where I pass it on to my boys. So I had to get to a place, and I'm not up here saying, well, I've got it. It is still hard. But I have gotten to the place where I don't think of him as the one thing he did wrong that wrecked and ruined my childhood. I realize he was a young man, far from home, dealing with some addictions, dealing with some bad decisions, had to get the restlessness out of his heart. And God knew that I would be better off without him in my life, in that state, than with him. And thank God for the godly men in our church growing up who stepped in for me. But hear me. We've got to get to the place where we see people not for what they did to us. And it's not that we're explaining it away. It's not that we're giving them excuses. It's not that we're excusing it. It's that we're forgiving it. And we're saying, I'm not going to live bound up in what happened 35 years ago anymore. I'm going to move on and I'm going to forgive you. And best I can, we're going to not forget that it ever happened, but we're not going to live like it just happened. We're going to move on. And you know who gets to enjoy the blessing of that? My children. Your spouse. Your coworkers. Brothers and sisters, this kingdom is the way to live. It is good for you. It is good for your home. It is good for your work. It's good for everyone. And the problem is we're in this prison and we're like, but what's the key? It's forgiveness. Not that. It's forgiveness. Please not that. It's forgiveness. And some of us have been holding on to this key for a decade saying, but if I turn that key, what? What? They've already forgotten. Many of them aren't thinking about you. If you turn that key, you might be released, could be released, should be released, but it's up to you if you will be released. Why is Jesus teaching us this? Because this is the beauty of the gospel. 2 minutes, I'm done. You and I were guilty of a debt we could never repay. And we, in our stupidity, said to God, I'll pay it back. That's why we do religious things. That's why we try to get involved in church and do all the activities. And God the Father had compassion on us. He said, your debt is forgiven through his sacrifice. He absorbed the loss, not us. Jesus died on the cross for us. And so the gospel is we've been forgiven a debt so great that the hope of the King, the hope of the compassionate, forgiving Father is we would walk out released. Released from bookkeeping. I don't walk around thinking of who owes me. I walk around realizing I'm forgiven to forgive. That's our great opportunity. And if you're here and you've not been forgiven by this King, today, there'll be prayer leaders after the service. Today, talk to one of our pastors in the lobby. Talk to me. Talk to anybody on stage in the lobby. We would love to help you understand. The King is looking to forgive debts this morning.